All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Raw Intuition Health Show. It is great to be with you all, and I greatly appreciate you hanging in with us. Again, we're having more technical issues to start, but we are now here. I'm hoping it's going to work, and because we have a very important show for you today. We have a very important guest and somebody that's doing extremely important work that I want you guys to know about and to understand the importance. I guess I've used the word important too many times, but it's very, very important work. So let's get started here. We're going to be meeting with Tamara Rubin, who is an internationally recognized multiple federal award-winning lead poisoning prevention advocate. She's a documentary filmmaker that I highly recommend you check out her documentary. I've got it linked in the description box down below for you to take a look. She is the mother of 4 sons, ages 26, 20, 17, and 14. If that's still the correct ages. She took on the cause of childhood lead poisoning and consumer quality goods safety advocacy after her sons were acutely lead poisoned by the work of a painting contractor in 2005. Tamara lives in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 youngest sons, who each have permanent disabilities from lead exposure as infants. Childhood lead poisoning is one of the single most costly and preventable environmental illnesses in the world today. Through the work of Lead Safe Mama LLC, they are committed to educating every parent about this wholly preventable environmental illness that causes permanent brain damage in young children, and yet still today conservatively costs the United States alone more than $50 billion annually. So through her public advocacy work and private consulting, Tamara has personally helped more than 10,000 families create safer homes and environments for their children, and continues to personally help families every single day. So that is incredible. Let's get Tamara on the show here. Welcome, Tamara. Thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. All right. If you guys could just let me know in the chat, and the chat is also another area that's giving me technical issues because it's not showing up here. So I have the YouTube page pulled up as well. Can you guys let me know? Can you hear both of us? And does everything sound okay? That would be awesome if you could let us know.
Testing 1, 2.
Yes.
I also
I'm not seeing anything come through yet from anybody. So hopefully there's still the people that I can see that were here in the chat. I know we started about a half hour late, so hopefully they're still here.
I'm having my son check in from Boston, and he just he's checking to see if he can hear.
Terrific. Okay, yes. I'm a little worried because I pulled up the YouTube page and I didn't hear anything on my end. Okay, Carl's still here. Carl, hey, what's up? Thanks for being here, Carl. Can you hear both of us?
Oh, and my son said he can hear us. He says it's working fine.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, great. All right.
Let me just double check. Okay, testing. Oh yes, he says it sounds great.
Oh,
yay!
Amazing. All right, perfect. All right. I knew we'd get through it somehow. So, okay, here we go. I think we're all in the clear. As you guys know, at every show at the end, we do a Q&A. And so have your questions ready. I hope there's going to be a lot of great questions from you guys. I know I've got some. But somebody that asks a question, you are put into a drawing for a free copy of any of my ebooks. So you can get a copy of one of my ebooks. And then also, Daily Green Boost has been a great supporter of the show, and they're offering a free bottle of barley juice grass powder for you guys. So if you are selected, I do a random drawing from the people that ask a question, and so you'll have a chance to win those prizes. So stick around to the end. And so before we get started, Tamara, if you want to just share with people where they can find you, and if they want to follow you, where would be the best place to go for that?
Okay, I'm everywhere, but mostly on Instagram. A big portion of my audience is young parents, even more so young mothers. It's about 90% mothers of children in the ages of, 0 to probably 6 years old. So Instagram is where a lot of my interaction happens and a lot of the conversations. I also have a Facebook group that has over 30,000 people. I think it's about 32,000 right now. And we have a YouTube channel that's a little bit anemic, but I post new videos there periodically. And that's a good place to check out testing methodologies for lead and look up specific things that I've tested and how I test them and what I recommend for different testing. And I have a TikTok channel, but it's not very active. So it's all at Lead Safe Mama, except for TikTok. It's at Lead Safe Mama 2022 underscore 2022, because at some point someone complained about my TikTok channel and it was taken down, my original one. So
Really?
I have
Wow.
people who like hearing what I have to say. So it's, you know.
Yeah, that's
And then the main source is my website, of course, which is leadsafemama.com or tamararubin.com. And fundamentally, I'm a writer and a researcher and a documentary filmmaker. So while I do have conversations and share content on social media, the bulk of what I write and my research and the test results and the lab reports are all on my website. And I encourage people to look at the website first and foremost. And if you have any questions, any article I've written, there's over 4,000 articles on my website. The articles have answers to pretty much every question that you might be able to ask about a certain topic.
amazing. Okay. Well, yeah, I've got most of that linked in the description box down below. I'll get the Facebook page added. But yeah, the link to your website, your YouTube channel, your Instagram channel, that's down there already, and the link to the documentary as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that, and I hope everybody will go check that out, follow your resources, learn from your website, and all the other resources that you have. So, okay, let's get in. So the topic discussion for today that we chose was 6 shocking sources of toxicants that people should be aware of. Now, I'm going to keep mine very short because I want you to get as much of the talking time as possible. Because I think the lead issue, as well as so many other of like cadmium and mercury and all the other things that your machine tests. I know that you're mostly focused on lead, right? But do you also go into those other areas?
My instrument, so I used different methodologies for testing for
Okay.
toxicants. My primary tool up until March of this year was X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. I have an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer. It's 6 a.m. here, so sorry, my tongue is twisting a little bit. And that is it's not the type of instrument that a home inspector has. It's the type of instrument used by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So it specifically and expressly tests for almost all elemental metals that can be tested with XRF technology. So I can test for lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, cobalt, titanium. So in my more recent articles, I put full toxicant profiles and full metal profiles for items that we test using XRF technology. But since March of 2024, we have been partnering with a lab. Simple Lab is the company, and they have been helping us do laboratory testing of foods. So that's another testing methodology. And we also use some reactive agent home test kits to test for lead, although those really don't work on consumer goods. And that's like a top message, is that Yeah, there's all these test kits out there that you might want to try and test your dishes or test different things in your house, test antiques, but most of them don't work on most consumer goods. Some of them work on some consumer goods. Some of them give false positives. Some of them give false negatives. So that's why I created my website as a resource with actual science and XRF results and lab results so people can look up things that they might have in their home and not have to worry about wasting money on a home test kit.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I actually purchased one of those test kits that you have. I've recently learned from you is not effective at testing things like paint and things. It's so yeah.
That they work, the home test kits work okay on paint, but
Oh, okay.
they're only testing for lead, and they only test for house paint. And I get a lot of into the weeds on the science here, but
Mm-hmm.
basically paint is toxic if it has lead levels over 90 parts per million. It's considered unsafe for children and generally unsafe. The law from 1978 regulated the presence of lead in paint, and it required that lead in paint not test positive above 600 parts per million. And so most of these test kits wanted to be compliant with the 1978 law. So they have tried to create replicable sensitivity down to 500 parts per million. So if something tests positive with a test kit, it likely is in violation of the 1978 law if it's house paint. But
Mm,
that's only house paint. And it could still be unsafe for kids and test negative with a home test kit because it's above 90 parts per million, but below the 500 parts per million level of sensitivity of those test kits. And then it's not testing for things like arsenic or antimony, other things that can be in paint. I think, well, we can get to that in a minute, but there are other toxicants in paint, and that's
mm-hmm.
so you can use a home test kit if you want to know if the paint in your house has lead, and they're not really useful for things beyond that.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So before we get into all the details and the questions, can you just share a little bit of your story, how you got into this field? And I mean, I know I just kind of shared a little bit of your background, but
Yeah.
is there anything more you want to share about that?
Well, so my kids were poisoned in 2005, and I couldn't find any resources. It's a long time ago now,
Mm-hmm.
2005. August, is it actually, was it today, or is it's about it, I think it was August 16th, 2005, that my kids were acutely poisoned. So this week. And that's 19 years ago. And there weren't any resources available that actually answered questions I wanted the answers to at the time. And I also met roadblocks one time trying to get information from healthcare practitioners, doctors, pediatricians, and nutritionists, anything like that. I couldn't find reasonable, science-based, not industry influenced information to help me make safer choices for my family and to help me get my children to safety in the middle of the crisis of my kids being poisoned. So I decided to start researching. My background prior to that was as a database designer with Apple. So I kind of am a data sponge, and I arrange data in my head, just for fun. That's what I do. And I'd been doing database design for independent projects for Starbucks and Nike and Kaiser Permanente hospitals. So I was trying to kind of aggregate the data in a way that made sense. And then I decided, okay, well, I got to put this out there for other people. And I created a website. And then that evolved into another website. And then that evolved into the current iteration, which is the leadsafemama.com website. And I wanted parents and everybody to be able to look up information for free, not behind a paywall, where the information was science-based and not influenced by industry. Because what I learned initially was that the data that was on the CDC, EPA, and FDA sites was all industry influenced,
Mm-hmm.
not like conspiracy theorists, but basically the way the science that our government puts out works is that anything that they're going to publish, there's opportunities for public citizens and industry to weigh in on what is going to end up being public policy and public statements. So lobbyists for different industries tend to influence the outcome of these kinds of policies as part of the system that we have in our government. And unfortunately, that results in policies that are not protective of children's health and not protective of human health in general. So
Yeah.
that's why I do what I do.
I love it. Yeah, it's such a great and important resource that you've created. So thank you for doing that. I send my my condolences, or my sympathy for the situation you had to go through in order to uncover this issue that we everybody really faces, especially after watching your documentary. It's so it was pretty eye opening to see how pervasive it actually is.
Yeah, people don't understand that this is their problem. A lot of health impairments and health complications can be really easily linked back causally to lead exposure or other toxicant exposure. And there's not a lot of healthcare professionals who know how to do that. And so things are assigned to, oh, well, this is some mysterious cause, when, oh, no, no, there's this obscure research paper that definitively causally linked this to lead exposure. So you need to, one, get tested for lead. You need to see if you can identify and eliminate sources of lead or other toxicants in your life. And because when doctors go to school, they don't get even a chapter on lead exposure. They only get like one page before they get their medical license. So there's not a lot of information provided to medical students, and that makes this even more hidden in terms of the information is not as commonly known and disseminated as it should be. So that's why I've decided to rely on the community-based approach and getting citizens involved with the inquiries. And right now what we're doing is we're doing food testing, and it's really interesting because I've asked my Let's Safe Mama community online, and I've got about 80,000 Instagram followers and 85,000 Facebook followers, and we have about 2 million readers on the website every year. And they're all chiming in with what food they want tested and which foods are important to them, because I couldn't know. I don't eat all this stuff. It's a lot of processed foods.
Sure.
And so that's been a really interesting collaborative experience, because they're also helping to cover the cost of the testing that we're doing, and they always have. So we've always been a community collaborative business model to empower people to both suggest and help cover the cost of the testing they want to do, so that this testing isn't influenced by any business or other entity, and that the test results aren't watered down in any way. They're just presented as facts, and then people can use that information to make safer choices for their family. So that's important.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, and so I guess we could start off with, I mean, the what I know that there's the topic, or the topic discussion that I figured we'd go into. We would each bring like three of our main sources of this, but it's almost like I want to just kind of get into more of just general information that you can share with people, that can be very helpful for them, whether they have children or not. Because from what I understand, this is an important topic, whether you're young or an adult.
Yeah, well, that's the other that's one of the main pieces of information that's a bit of misinformation on the CDC and EPA and FDA's website. All of this information is targeted at children under 6, when these poisons impact people of every age. I mean,
Hmm.
they're carcinogens, they're neurotoxins, and they're also causing things like arthritis and memory impairments, joint pain, and breathing issues and skin issues. Like I said, almost every health impairment has been studied in relation to lead exposure, and there are correlative or causal summaries, in scientific inquiries demonstrating links. And the government's only looking at kids. Nobody's looking at adults. And so that's a really interesting thing, because in my work, what I do is I always say, this is illegal in this context, or the scientific recommendation is this context. And those contexts are always about children, because all of the science has been done to determine what's safe for children, if there has been any science, and there's nothing protecting adults out there.
Hmm.
Basically, it's all bets are off. We can poison adults, industry can poison adults, and nobody cares.
Yeah, which I mean, and that also poisons children, because especially if it's a pregnant mother, or even somebody that's expecting to be pregnant, over time, if they have lead levels in their body, it's going to go to the child.
Yeah, and I have four sons, and so I think about the impacts they have as young adults, and we're talking about ADHD and in terms and how that can impact your work experience, your ability to function in a work environment, and two of my kids have autism diagnoses, and how that impacts later um, uh, both work success, academic success, and life success. Social skills, anxiety is a really big one. So, there's a lot of impacts and reproductive health issues are significant too. I mean, you said, as the title is, surprising facts. Well, one of the most surprising things that's come up for me is that back in 2011, Dr. Felicia Rubito, who's a professor at Tulane in New Orleans and also a researcher, she put together a study where she analyzed population levels of lead exposure in pregnant women or women of childbearing age. And what she found was a blood lead level of 0.43, which is very, very low, can have an impact on fertility and birth outcomes, and can result in negative birth outcomes like low birth weight in newborns and other birth complications. And so when the pediatricians are looking at lead exposures for children, they're often misinformed and telling parents that, oh, your child's fine if their blood level is under a 3.5. Well, we're talking about not 3.5, but 0.43,
Wow.
causing infertility and birth complications. And so my recommendation is that everyone should be under a blood level of 1.0. And I say that because most of the testing methodologies for testing for lead in blood don't test below 1.0. So you want to know that you're under a 1.0. And if you can find a more accurate blood lead test from a different doctor who isn't kind of mainstream, and you can find out if are you a 0.1, are you a 0.3 or 4, that's good information to have as a background. And if you're anything over a 1.0, then you have a specific source of exposure, and you should try and identify and eliminate that source of exposure. And then that brings us to the work that I'm doing today, which is in the food realm, because a lot of people are testing positive for blood levels in the range of 1 to 3, and they're being told by their doctors, oh, no problem. But it turns out that that toxicant exposure is coming from food sources that they're unknowingly eating because they think they're eating a healthier diet. So that's a real concern.
Yeah, and one of the maybe most interesting things is that from what I've seen from the testing that you've done, a lot of the uh, labeled healthier type foods, the more expensive, higher end type, processed foods that people think are more healthy, tend to be some of the more contaminated ones. Is that right?
Yeah, and so that's another thing that's really disturbing,
Yeah.
is that these are being sold as healthier foods. They're being sold in like the natural food aisle.
Mhm.
They are very expensive. I mean, comparatively, sometimes more, 2 or 3 or 4 times as expensive as the non-healthy alternative. And these are foods that have ingredients that are ostensibly healthy, but once they've been processed into a packaged food, they get contaminated with lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. And so you have foods that people think are healthy, but because they're buying them in a packaged form, are unhealthy. And like the kind of the poster child for that is cassava.
Mm.
So and the interesting thing about my work, and do you have a primarily vegan audience? Is that your
Yes. Yeah.
okay? So the interesting thing is that we're testing a lot of vegan foods and foods that kind of cater to specific diets like gluten-free
Mm.
and sugar-free and grain-free. So when you start restricting your diet, and then also using packaged foods to supplement your calorie intake, that becomes the problem. My son is vegan, my husband's vegan, my other son's vegan. We have a lot of vegans in the house, and it's all good. And the thing that I see them forgetting most often is to eat vegetables.
Mm. Yeah.
It's like if you're vegan, you need to eat all the vegetables, eat the fresh vegetables, eat as many fresh fruits and vegetables as you can,
Yeah.
and fresh plant foods, and really avoid the packaged ones. Because what happens is if you have a cassava root, which is like a potato on some level, and you take it home and you wash it and you peel it, and then you wash it again to get any residue off from having peeled it, and then you cook it, it's going to be relatively low lead. But if you take a cassava root and you put it through a machine peeling process, and it partially peels the root but leaves some of the peel on with some of the dirt from where it was grown, and then it goes to a desiccation and concentration process, and then it gets goes through another round of machinery to be formed into a chip after it's made into flour, you have multiple sources of both the problem that contamination sources have not been removed, it wasn't washed properly, and contamination has been added by the machining at every step of the way.
Mm.
So you have like a doubly, triply, quadruply contaminated food product when you get around to the final product. So my general advice for vegans and everyone else is avoid flour if you can. Flour seems to be, from the testing we've done so far, one of the most consistently contaminated foods. And unfortunately, that's organic flour, that's wheat flour, that's cassava flour,
Mm.
that's all the flours. And it has nothing to do with the original plant. It has to do with the fact that it's heavily processed. So,
Okay, well, that is great to know, and that is why I do promote a whole food plant-based diet to my followers, and that's what I follow. And I will say I did get my lead level tested back in 2018, and it did show I was less than 1. It came up
oh, good.
as non-detectable, I guess. But so you're saying, and this was just at like a mainstream clinic. So I would need to, if I wanted to know specifically, because I'm guessing their instruments don't measure that low, right?
Well, so again, I hate to get too much into the politics and the
Sure.
weeds of the science, but unfortunately, the lead industry is a big industry that has lobbyists that influence lots of sub industries.
Mm.
And I learned, I think about 10 years ago, that the lead industry was actually lobbying against the blood lead testing industry to limit the level of detection for blood lead testing.
Mm.
So it used to be that you could get more accurate blood lead testing done pervasively at different clinics, but now you have to actually look around for it. You have to call in advance, call the lab. I tell people to consider calling their local children's hospital
Mm.
because they tend to have the most accurate labs because they're testing neonates, like preemies and things. And if they don't do adults and you are an adult and need to be tested, they might know what labs test down to a 0.1 or a 0.4, what the low threshold of detection is going to be. You can also do urine testing and full metal panels, which do more of a bar graph analysis of your levels, or hair testing as a way to determine what your metals level is. But
Okay.
the problem with that is a lot of Western medicine doctors don't believe in the urine testing and hair testing because there isn't enough comparative data population-wise to know what certain levels mean from those tests. But I recommend getting it done anyway, because if you have a urine test and that your doctor has approved, and you have all the metals tested for at that time, and then you think you have a potential incidental exposure, or you have a symptomatic expression, like you're having sudden joint pain, or you're having headaches, or you're having memory issues, and then you get another metals panel and you can compare the two, and then you'll see, has there been a change? So it's valuable information when you compare it to your own levels of a previous test, and that's why it's good to have a baseline. And that period, the interval in which you had the tests, will give you a time frame as to when you might have had exposure if your second test indicates that you've had a new level of exposure. So it's a good tool.
Okay, great. And then I guess a follow-up to that, or just a comment, I guess, from what I learned from your documentary also, is that uh, even even though, like, say for me personally, I tested at less than 1 this time, just back in 2018 is when I had it done. That might I mean, that shows my current levels, but that doesn't mean previously, sometime in my life, that I wasn't exposed, and the effects, well, maybe the blood level went down, the effects can linger. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, so you're in the Midwest. How old are you? Do you tell
I
people how old you?
not. I mean, I'm not against it. I'm 37.
Okay. Okay. So, you were born during a time where they were still using leaded gasoline. Leaded gasoline wasn't officially outlawed until 1996, and there's still leaded gasoline for available for other uses, non-mainstream uses. So, a friend of mine sent me a picture, I think in 2014, of a pump in I think it was northern New Hampshire that sold leaded gasoline. So if you have like an area where there's a lot of people doing race car sports, there might
Mm,
be a leaded gasoline pump. I think they've outlawed those now too. But you basically at your age have had leaded gasoline exposure from living in urban areas, being around cars, or visiting urban areas. If you were born in 1996 or later, you have less of that kind of environmental exposure, but you also might have exposure from having lived in a city or live in an older home and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure you kind of get a blood lead test just so to have a baseline there. But yeah, the blood lead levels is generally only the lead that's circulating in your blood. And the reason a urine test is helpful is it's not just looking for lead, it's looking for mercury and arsenic and cobalt and other things. So it's sometimes useful to have other considerations evaluated as well, especially now that a lot of the younger people are getting cancer at a higher rate. I don't know if you saw the news last week, but it was in the news cycle. And they're saying, is it Gen X? I don't know, whatever the,
mm.
the Gen X and younger, or no, Gen Y, Gen
Yeah.
Y are getting cancer at higher rates than their ancestors, than their elders.
Mm,
And there's a lot of linking that to processed foods. And the metals that you're finding in processed foods include arsenic in rice. And mercury again can be found in lots of things, but cassava and chocolate. And cadmium can be found in lots of things, but primarily in chocolate and flour products. And so it's not just lead. So if you get a full metals panel, you're actually getting a better sense of what other exposures you might have. And the urine test is going to be more what's stored in the body, because sometimes they use a provocation agent to pull it out for the urine test.
mm.
So that's a useful context to what's just circulating around your blood right now. That's an indication of recent exposures. So yeah, your historic exposure is going to have lifelong implications, but there's not always a way to evaluate what that historic exposure has been, unfortunately. And that's why primary prevention is the most important thing, is preventing the exposure in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay. That's great information. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess what are some of the most common sources? I know you mentioned the flour or processed foods, and maybe gasoline. Where would you expect most people are becoming exposed to lead?
Well, so right now, on a population level, if you're looking at food sources, we're talking about, and just looking at lead, we're looking at, chocolate and root vegetables that aren't cleaned properly, and that includes cassava and sweet potatoes and things like that. And then if you look at other sources, which are generally and arguably more significant, housing. So if you live in a house built before 1978, and if that house has original windows, then it is creating lead dust at a level that can poison your family and anyone who lives in the house just from opening and closing the windows.
Mm,
Luckily, most houses have had their windows replaced, or many have, depending on where you live. And that's the first thing to look in it for when you're either renting or buying, is does it have new windows? If it has original windows, it might be something to steer clear of.
mm,
There's energy implications. Excuse me. on single pane windows, but then you're not creating lead dust if you don't have old lead contaminated windows. The other thing in terms of housing exposure sources is baseboards and doors, because any kind of friction surface, and people don't think of a baseboard as a friction surface, but basically you bump into a baseboard, it's there to protect the wall because it gets bumped into a lot. And then you see paint chips coming off the baseboards. And so a lot of times in older homes, the baseboards are painted with high levels of lead paint. And then outside of the housing considerations, and again, you can watch my film for a full course on that, essentially, a 92-minute long course, is consumer goods. And the consumer goods that are most often contaminated are ceramic dishes, and also the nonstick pots and pans that can test positive for lead and titanium and cobalt and all sorts of bad things. Even the ones that say they're healthy, like that's the thing that bugs me the most, is that we have these brands that say that they are chemical free, like Caraway pan and Always pan and Extrema, and all these pans that say they're metals free, chemical free, non-leaching, but they all do have unsafe toxic chemicals in them, and they leach over time. So leach testing on dishes and pots and pans to determine their safety is only done when those items are new and not when they're used. So you can use your pot or pan for a year, and then all of a sudden the surface coating's scraped. And where did that go? That went into your food. And oh yeah, it's just a little bit of the coating that's gone, but it's the microparticulate traces that enter your food that are enough to poison you. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. So, you know, pots and pans, I recommend avoiding all of the new fancy things, and sticking with stainless steel, glass, and plain cast iron. Those are your best choices. And then jewelry is kind of a weird one, but some people rely on jewelry, and I recommend limiting it because gold is often contaminated with mercury. Costume jewelry is often high levels of lead or cadmium or both. Things that say like lead-free pewter, well, they always replace the lead in something that says it's lead-free with something else bad. So the lead-free marking isn't necessarily a good thing. So lead-free pewter usually has high levels of antimony. Antimony was added to the list of known carcinogens in December of 2021. And it's really, really toxic at very low levels. So that's the same with lead-free crystal. You want lead-free crystal, but lead-free crystal has high levels of antimony in it. So you're better off buying clear glass wine glasses at the dollar store, and those are not going to have toxicants in them. That's the other thing, like the main takeaway. Sorry, I'm babbling, but you can. The solution to these things is not to go with the more expensive option, but the inexpensive options are usually less toxic across the board. And that's with fruits and vegetables and glassware, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the raw, fresh fruits and vegetables are less toxic than processed, expensive, you know, snacks. And plain glassware from Walmart or Target or the dollar store is less toxic than something from Macy's or Crate and Barrel or Pottery Barn.
Yeah. It's amazing how how that works. The more you think you're buying something that's supposed to be so much higher quality and better for you, when you get some of these more high end things, and it ends up being even more toxic for you. So
that's really common. It's so interesting to me. It's one of the most interesting things, but I think it also was common during Roman times when the wealthy elite during Roman times had access to the more expensive things. So they were poisoning themselves as well with their dishes, with their lead contaminated dishes, with their wine where they use lead added salts to sweeten their wine. And we're doing the same thing now. The vintage Louis Vuitton purses that go for, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars, they're leaded, they're lead contaminated.
wow.
The Crate and Barrel lovely pottery that someone registered for their wedding 10 years ago tends to have a really high level of lead. And while it might have passed leach testing at the time of manufacture, that doesn't say that it's not leaching later, which it often is. So, even on my website, if you look up Williams Sonoma, you'll see brand new ceramic dishes that were purchased last year or the year before that have seriously high levels of lead on the food surface.
Mm,
And they're sold with a lead warning, which gets removed from the package, right? Or removed, and so you don't notice it. And you don't think about it 10 years later if you test positive for lead and you're using these dishes as your everyday dishes. So stick with clear glass dishes. You know, keep it simple. That's the
yeah,
best rule.
I love it. Yeah, that's so important. And yeah, you mentioned how sometimes these companies will get like a lead-free certification. I think we see, and then they replace it with something as toxic or more toxic. We see that so often with BPA baby bottles or Tupperware or something. They have the BPA label on there to make you think that they removed the dangerous part of what was in there, when really they just replaced it with another bisphenol, BPS or BPF, and there's various other examples, but it's just incredible how this is consistent across industries. It's like basically it's obviously an industry tactic to basically soothe customers, the public's concerns, and get them to continue purchasing their products, which they know are harmful, which is
Well,
interesting.
you're touching on like a bigger, like, okay, just the idea of food storage. That's a
Uh-huh.
bigger, it's an indicator of a bigger problem. So we're trying to, as my family's been trying to save money, and we did this crazy thing that people think is not a thing that would have saved money, but we went to Europe for most of last year as a way to save money. Now, the health insurance was a fraction of the cost. Instead of spending more than 20,000 a year, we spent 1,500 for the year for our family to have health insurance while we're in Europe.
Wow.
And then and we didn't use food storage like you're saying about the plastic. We went to the farmers market every morning and we bought fresh vegetables every morning from the local farmers market in France. It was amazing. And then the other thing is, like, in the United States, we live in Portland, Oregon. A small bundle of fresh organic carrots costs about $3. A small bundle of fresh organic carrots in France or England or Scotland costs 50 cents. So, they're eating fresh. They're not relying on products to store their food, in their refrigerator for multiple days. So they're not exposing their food to toxicants there. They're not cooking as much as we do. They're eating more raw, fresh, whole foods, and they're foods that are available are not treated with pesticides and the toxic fertilizers. And it's amazing. It's
Mhm.
amazing how much healthier you can be if you don't live in the United States. And that's a bigger problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And the consumer culture that goes with that, like feeling that we need to spend our money buying things and that we need to look for BPA free this or BPS free that or lead free that. The only reason we need to look for those things is because we're buying these products, and we don't need all of these things to have a healthy long life.
Yeah.
Uh, but
And
that's pretty confirmed.
true. If you think about it, it's like the only reason these products have these labels on them also is because people like yourself and other people in the public that were harmed by these what was in these products. So it was put into the marketplace without even without testing in the first place. So I think for me personally, that's why I think, I try and promote to people to rely on as few products as possible, because I mean, if you're relying on something that comes out of, from an industry from a factory, there's there's they're they're trying to just get people to buy their product, and clearly the system that's set up, that's put in place, people think we have these consumer protection agencies that are keeping everything, on where it's supposed to be without harming people. They're really not. The industries, from what I've learned, control the agencies that are supposed to be regulating them, and so it's very difficult to feel safe, in my opinion, with a lot of these products. I don't know what your thought is on that.
Control is a rough word. I'd say
Sure.
influence is more accurate.
Okay.
Yes, you can say yes, they control them. So okay, like if you look at it from a bigger picture, but if you want to be more precise and less controversial,
Sure.
like I was saying earlier about the blood lead testing, like the lead industry lobbied for like, why do we need blood lead testing to be so accurate? Let's have it be less accurate, because if blood lead testing is less accurate, who benefits? Well, the lead industry benefits because fewer people being diagnosed with lead poisoning. So fewer cases of lead poisoning can be blamed on the lead industry. So they benefit because people aren't going after them.
Mhm.
And people's like, oh, what's the lead industry? Well, the lead industry is a real thing, and it's an agency of it's a conglomeration of industries, of businesses that produce, mine, manufacture leaded products. And every year, including through COVID, they announced record profits every year. They've never had a year where they haven't produced record profits. And they make car batteries, they make all sorts of things that have lead in them. And they have an annual Lead Industries Association conference every year. You could look that up online. And one year their topic for the conference was how to address the concerns raised by the fact that the lead in car batteries is recyclable. Like, wait a second, what? You want the concern that it's recyclable? Because if something's recyclable, they can't resell it and make money for it in the same way they could as the raw product. Anyway, so in terms of industry influence, I think a really important thing for vegans and vegetarians to understand is that the supplement industry is very poorly regulated.
Yeah.
And the main reason or the main method in which it's poorly regulated is that the levels of toxicants that are tested for by supplement companies aren't sufficient to be protective of human health. So just like they're trying to get the blood lead levels not to test below a certain threshold, a lot of food industries and supplement industry players are testing products down to single-digit parts per million ranges for toxicants. So they'll say, oh, our product is negative for lead, less than 5 parts per million, or less than 1 part per million. But the problem is food is toxic in parts per billion, and there's 1,000 parts per billion and 1 part per million. So if you have a food product and it says we're negative for lead, look, we're less than 2 parts per million. I'm like, wait, you could still be 1,900 parts per billion, and food is toxic for lead at 5 parts per billion, up to 600 parts per billion, depend on who you look at for those regulatory standards. The European Union allows up to 1 part per million, or 2 parts per million lead in some spices and chocolates and things. Sometimes it's 600 parts per billion is the threshold, I believe, for cadmium for certain kinds of chocolate, and 800 parts per billion for other kinds of chocolate. So it's allowed at really high levels, but if you're only testing down to 2 parts per million, you're not testing sufficiently to determine whether or not the product has an unsafe level of lead or cadmium or anything along those lines.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, so there's a buyout, there's a control in terms of industry isn't self-regulating. Our government's not regulating the industry. So we have to start doing the science ourselves. And that's why we've been with my business, which is Let's Safe Mama LLC. And I always add the LLC. It's kind of weird. Some people like drop the LLC. I'm like, limited liability company,
Right.
because companies try and sue me all the time.
I can
Or
imagine.
me. Yeah. They always, I love it actually. I think it's funny. They write these threatening letters, these natural health companies, natural product companies, and then I publish the letters on my website,
Yeah.
and the crowd goes wild, and my readers go after the companies and say, how dare you? She's using science. This is replicable science. You can't say that it's not legitimate. So that's what we're now doing with the food industry. The testing that we're using, the laboratory testing for foods, we're testing down to 1.5 parts per billion for lead, and 3 parts per billion for cadmium, and 10 parts per billion for arsenic, and 1.5 parts per billion for mercury. So we're testing down to human safety levels, which is really amazing. This
Yeah.
opportunity being given with this lab, and we're finding toxicants in nearly every food we're testing. And I say nearly every because now we're up to 7 foods that we've tested that have been non-detect for lead, Cadbury. I want to say chocolate. A Freudian slip. We've found 7 foods that are non-detect for lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, and below these low thresholds of detection that are levels that are protective of human health. So that's another really interesting thing. The food industry and the supplement industry keep saying through their lobbyists, well, these levels that are proposed that are protective of human health that have been proposed to the FDA are useful. We as industry can't achieve these levels. They're not achievable. So it's an unreasonable standard to try and impose on the food process industry, the processed food industry, or the supplement industry. And so we can't meet those levels. So you can't set that as a regulatory limit. And what we've proven with the food testing we've been doing since March is that we have now 7 products from 7 different companies, all who met those limits. So these regulatory standards that have been proposed are achievable and are being achieved by these companies that have made these safer foods. So that whole industry argumentation about non-achievable toxicant levels is out the window. The foods that we found that are safer, because I know that's the next question.
Yeah.
There's a chia seeds. There's a link on my website. If you go to the homepage of the website, right now it has a number 5. I'm going to change it to number 7. It's a big pink number 5. But and if you click on that, you'll see links to all the foods. But there's an einkorn flour from Italy. There's some chia seeds from Mexico. There's an organic sprouted glyphosate-free oat from Canada. There is a salt from Oregon. And then we also just got a beverage that's a soda and soy milk. I can't remember what the other ones are at the top of my head. I've got to find it. But anyway, so they're all different types of products.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting because if these companies can make these safer products, then every company can make a safer product.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll have to. Do you have you considered interviewing people from these companies to figure out what their practices are that maybe they could teach the world how so these other companies can learn how to do it, or maybe they already know and it's just they don't want to hurt their bottom dollar? Do you think that's part of it?
So so the 5th product is a coffee, is an espresso roast.
Okay.
So there's chia seeds and a rolled oats, a salt, and a soy milk, and a flour product. The interesting thing is it's been a fun week. I've been approached by all sorts of people for interviews because this food testing work has really snowballed, taken off. It's crazy.
Sure.
In terms of attention that it's getting, and people are like, wow, this is really interesting. No one's doing this, until now, because other people doing food testing aren't releasing the lab reports. They're even the consumer reports who I've collaborated with and who did a follow-up piece on my work after I tested some baby food puffs, even consumer reports didn't release the lab reports. They instead did a comparative analysis, kind of grading the product, saying, well, this one's safest and this one's not safe. And, but they're not telling you why or how much toxicants are in each one. And so by us releasing the lab reports, we're giving people real data to make informed choices from. And the unique position that I'm in, because of the more than a decade of doing XRF testing of consumer goods and objects, so I've been doing that since 2009, is that I am more aware of where potential sources of food contamination are coming from than perhaps other people doing this work. And what I've done a lot of is I've tested a lot of machine equipment using XRF technology. And I don't know if anybody's in, my husband's, he makes bikes and repairs bikes. And so if anybody's in a machining industry, they'll be familiar with the fact that a lot of machine components have anti-corrosion coatings on them. And one of those coatings is a cadmium-based coating. And if you have a food processing machine that has cadmium coatings on components that wear over time, then the cadmium from that coating is wearing off into the food.
Mm.
And so I just wrote about this recently in an article I published yesterday about chocolate contamination. It's my theory that the cadmium contamination is in large part coming from the machines that are being used, especially by these smaller companies who aren't using all stainless steel machines. They're not using the same machines that, say, like M&M's is making less toxic candies than Unreal. Well, this is, again, it's just a theory, but I published my M&M test results. They didn't have any cadmium. I bet you they're a huge company. I bet you they really invested in all stainless steel machines. And the company making these other chocolates, Unreal, they're not putting the same level of investment into the machining equipment because they're a much smaller company. And I think it's highly likely that they have cadmium contaminated machine parts that are wearing into their food systems. And that's one of the reasons we have this level of food contamination, both with cadmium and also lead. There's a lot of lead contaminated machining parts. So I think that anybody who knows about machines knows about how leaded brass it's called red brass, is self-lubricating and wears over time. And part of that's how the machine works, because the grinding has to have a piece that helps it grind. And the self-lubricating nature of brass makes it so that that component wears and needs to be replaced annually or every couple of years or however often. And that microparticulate of material that wears off of those components, if that's on a food processing machine, is wearing off into the food being processed. So I think that's one potential source of contamination. There are others, but I think that's one that needs further review and should be examined closely by a lot of these smaller companies. Yeah, sorry, I'm so babbling, but the
No, this
other
is
thing
perfect.
the thing that supports this theory, again, theory, it's my theory. I don't know if you know the Monty Python skit about the theory. This is my theory, my kids joke. But other thing that's supportive of that is we're finding all of these ground flour products to test positive for traces of cadmium. Well, the only thing that they have in common is that they probably are all using similar grinding machines, because we have an organic flour, King Arthur, positive for cadmium. We have gold medal non-organic flour positive for cadmium. And what do they have in common? Well, they're not the same crop. They're made in different factories, but who's making the machines that's grinding that flour? So again, getting back to your concerns for your specific audience, if you want to make flour products, it's super easy to do yourself at home. Get a Vitamix and throw whatever you want to turn into flour into the Vitamix, and it's going to have way less contamination than buying processed flour. And you can also store that in the freezer after you ground it. You don't have to make fresh flour every time you want to make something out of flour. But you can also throw in things with additional nutrients like sprouted seeds or nuts or whatever you want to add to the flour, to not just to have it be a wheat flour, for example. We tend to, at our house, when my kids were younger and when I cooked more, we would make our own flour pretty much all the time. So I think it's a really easy to do, and I recommend it. Anyway.
Amazing. Thank you for that tip and that information as well. So yeah, it's not just food that people should be paying attention to, right?
Right.
I know you mentioned in the documentary again that you weren't wearing lipstick because you
Yeah.
found that the lipstick that you had been using, was it lead that was in that lipstick?
It was lead. It was a Burt's Bees tinted lip balm, so, Burt's Bees, this is natural, right? Well, and then Burt's Bees was bought by Clorox. And, it's always important to look at who the parent company is,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of these natural brands have been sold out. Somebody suggested I test Skinny Pop, and I was researching it. I guess Skinny Pop popcorns made or owned by Hershey, I think.
Mm.
I can't remember. And another product I tested the other day, they're owned by Campbell's. So when you look at these products, whether or not it's personal care products or food products, actually do the research that you might do for anything bigger in your life, especially if it's something you're going to use on a regular basis, use daily or consume. But if you're looking into makeup, really see who owns the company. Was the company sold to a larger company at some point? Are they using the same ingredients that they used to use? And a lot of times the answer is no. I think in general, I recommend against using makeup and well, I think you should limit personal care products to what's absolutely necessary because of the toxicant concerns in so many personal care products and the fact that you're actually putting this stuff on your body. And again, because the lack of regulation. So I believe the current limit for lead in lipstick is 7 parts per million.
Wow.
That's 7,000 parts per billion. That's a lot of lead, especially if it's on your lips and you're ingesting a lot of it. And that might just be a regulatory guidance that I don't think it's a law. It's not an enforceable law.
Mm.
But you know, even the ones that are doing better still have contamination. And I think the other thing to look for is environmentally conscious buzzwords that aren't legitimate. So for makeup again, a lot of people go for mineral-based makeup, made of natural minerals. Well, cadmium and lead are minerals. And if it's a reddish pigment, it's probably going to have traces of cadmium. I tested some Origins blush and it was positive for traces of cadmium. And cadmium causes cancer. So why would you put that on your skin?
Yeah.
I just think there's a lot to avoid. But once you start avoiding these things, as a rule, it's not complicated. Like not buying makeup gives you more money for groceries.
Right. Yes.
um,
Okay. Terrific. Yeah. Great information. Okay. Before we get into, do you have time for some Q&A from the audience?
Yeah, I was wondering, are there questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have people throw them in the chat here. Last thing before we get into the Q&A, if I could just get your thoughts on maybe some, and I know it kind of was part of everything you've been saying, but are there some main preventative measures or solutions people can implement into their daily life to reduce as much as possible or practical their exposure to a lot of these things like lead and cadmium and things?
From a housing perspective, get a newer construction house if you can. That doesn't mean get a brand new house, but post 1989 is good. Because then it's had a chance to settle and it's, usually made of better construction materials, but doesn't have lead. Unfortunately, there's lead in water delivery systems up through January of 2024 is when the new regulation went into place,
Oh, wow.
limiting. Yeah, that's a shocker. So get your water tested for lead, even if you think, oh, well, your house is newer, your pipes are newer. Just make sure the water that's coming out at the end is tested. It doesn't matter if your city's testing for lead in the water because that doesn't show what's coming into your house. And there's a lot of opportunities for the city water to be contaminated on the delivery system between the city and your tap. So get your water tested, get yourself tested, test your home if you live in a pre-1978 house. And the best way to test your home is with dust wipe sampling tests. There's a kit online. It's $75 for 5 dust wipes. And if you look up dust wipe sampling in my search bar, it'll pop up and it explains how to do that. And that way, are you bringing in dust from the city outside that might be contaminated with lead? So testing is your best takeaway. Living in a newer construction home, avoiding antiques is a really good, rule of thumb, especially if you're trying to get pregnant. You don't want to even have trace levels of exposure in your life. Avoid vintage jewelry. If you like jewelry, I recommend sticking with silver, not gold. Gold can be contaminated with mercury. And silver is the least contaminated, not antique silver. Antique silver can have high levels of lead, but newer silver, 925 stamp silver is good. And then, generally simplifying your life. And again, like I said, for dishes and pots and pans, you want glass, stainless steel, and cast iron. I like, undecorated wood serving bowls and serving spoons and things like that. And the main thing is don't worry about these things. These are simple choices. You don't have to go out and replace everything in your kitchen or your home all at once. Do it gradually. And in the home, avoid ceramics as much as possible, especially vintage or antique ceramics. Your grandmother's china is not your friend. Your grandmother doesn't want you to be poisoned by her old dishes that she never used very often anyway. So, definitely don't use those. And then for foods, stick with raw, fresh, whole as much as possible. And then if you have to buy something packaged, don't beat yourself up about it, but make safer choices. So we've recently discovered that all potato chips are contaminated. So that includes the ones not fried in seed oil. The avocado oil ones have as much cadmium or close to the same amount of cadmium as the seed oil ones. So maybe avoid potato chips, make healthier choices across the board. Avoid cassava. And if possible, avoid rice, which I know is really hard because we used to eat rice all the time as a primarily vegan home. And we had rice with every meal, and our son tested positive for high levels of arsenic.
Wow.
So we stopped. We sometimes get rice out. If we go out for Chinese food, we'll have a little rice as a treat, but really we're not eating rice anymore. And we recommend not eating rice if you can avoid it. And if you're not sure that you want to avoid these things, get a test, get a urine test, a hair test, a blood lead panel, a full metals panel to determine whether or not you have these exposure sources. If you're high for arsenic, avoid rice. If you're not high for arsenic, you might not want to avoid rice. If you're high for lead, avoid cassava and chocolate. If you're high for cadmium, avoid chocolate. If you're not high for those things, maybe you're not eating enough of those things to impact your health. They are bioaccumulative. They accumulate in your body over time. So even if you don't test positive right now, the lifelong impacts can be significant. So you still want to limit consumption of these things. It's a long takeaway, but I think those are the highlights.
Yeah, that was terrific. Thank you so much. All right. Well, that was an incredible hour or so of very valuable information that people can take home and start implementing. Because I don't think people realize the the levels of some of these things in the environment. And I know you've shown video and posts of encountering these things at other public attractions, museums and schools even, and parks and things. So it's good to be aware of a lot of these things that can really kind of sneak up on you and you don't really think about.
And you can't avoid it all.
Sure.
Like you have to send your kid to the local school, and the local school has lead contamination. You can't avoid it all.
Yeah.
You can advocate for them to clean up the lead hazards, but in the meantime, make sure you send your kid to school with bottled water from home that's been filtered, that is lead free.
Mhm.
Do the things you can do, and try not to stress too much about the things you can't control, because you can't control everything.
Yeah. I want to read this really quick. I read this. I wish I had more time to prepare for this interview. I know we kind of agreed on it within just a few short days ago, but so I read this from nutritionfacts.org regarding lead. It says intake of certain nutrients have been associated with lower lead levels in the body. For example, women with higher intakes of thiamine, also called B1, tend to have lower blood levels, and the same was found for lead-exposed steel workers, and not just with thiamine, as content of dietary fiber, iron, and thiamine intake each correlated inversely with blood lead concentrations in workers. The thinking is that fiber might attach to lead and flush it out of the body. The iron would inhibit the lead absorption, and thiamine may accelerate lead removal from through the bile. So they're suggesting that eating a lot of iron and fiber and B vitamin-rich foods could help reduce the absorption of some of that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I have thoughts. I read a lot of these studies, and
Okay.
I fundamentally disagree with the advice in them, because I think the studies aren't fully comprehensive. They're testing for lead in the blood,
Hmm.
but they're not able to test for lead in bones and tissues, and I think they're not fully accounting for the absorption of lead and how quickly lead is absorbed, because it biomimics calcium in the body.
Mm.
One of the big studies, or a lot of the studies that are emphasized by pediatricians, is that if you make sure you eat enough calcium, then your body won't absorb lead. If there's lead there, it'll go for the calcium instead of the lead. I don't even know that that's been proven.
Mm.
I think these are all theoretical. And I think by focusing on lead in the blood, you're misdirecting in a way. I mean, I believe he's a good scientist, the guy who you quoted, the nutrition fact, he pays attention. But I
Hmm.
think that if I've been trying to get him to have a conversation with me,
Oh,
because some of the
nice.
stuff he says is a little misdirected in that, the scientific studies have shown the 90% of the lead you've ever been exposed to is still in your body.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of the considerations related to excretion, and elimination and detox are not fully explored, except for one. The only one that I'm aware of that's been really fully explored is the garlic studies. So
Mm.
there have been studies about garlic that have been done in Vietnam, Korea, Japan, all over the world. And what they've shown is they've studied animals. They've done animal studies where they fed animals lead and then they fed them garlic, and they had a control where they just fed them lead and didn't feed them garlic. And then they dissected the animals. We're talking about chickens and rats and pigs. And they found that the lead levels in the animals that were fed garlic were much lower in the bones, in the tissues, in the brain, in the liver. So garlic is really inexpensive, readily available in around the world, and is also has a lot of other wonderful properties, and has been scientifically demonstrated to actually help the body remove lead from stored lead sources, which I think is more important, because reducing lead levels in the blood doesn't mean anything, because lead levels in the blood reduce over time because it's absorbed by the tissues and
Sure.
it's absorbed by the bones. And so you don't actually have knowledge of why the lead level is being reduced, um, in addition to the regular absorption rates
Hmm.
that might happen. And there's a 30 to 45 day half-life. It's different in all people. It's different based on a lot of different circumstances. I think there's too many circumstances to control in scientific studies, in terms of evaluating the potential for fiber and other things to decrease absorption.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, eat a healthy diet, always a good thing.
Yeah.
Blueberries are supposed to be really helpful with detox, and add garlic. What the scientific community has studied, is that because the garlic studies were so convincing, that even with children who've been acutely poisoned and admitted to the hospital for medical, pharmaceutical, chemical chelation in the hospital when they have severe lead poisoning, they are now supplementing those chelation cases with garlic, because they're showing that the garlic is as effective or even more effective than the pharmaceutical interventions, and has fewer side effects. So I always push people towards garlic because it's been really, really well studied. And I just think most of those other studies don't account for the natural, anticipated reduction of blood level over time with the half-life of lead in blood because of absorption. And I think and maybe that study has, I haven't read the one that you're referring to specifically, but
Okay.
uh, that's what I've seen.
Okay. Well, that's a great feedback. I'm glad I asked. So terrific. Okay, let's get into the Q&A. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you ask a question, you will be in the drawing to get a free ebook and a free bottle of Daily Green Boost. Please put them in the chat now, and I will try and go back and look. Again, my system right now is kind of wonky, so I don't have the chat in front of me. I have to pull up. So I haven't been able to, if you guys have been mentioning things, I apologize. I haven't really been able to look at that at all during the show. So let's see. Tessa says, can't wait to watch the documentary. Awesome, Tessa. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a great documentary. And again, I have it linked in the description box down below. So just click that
So
link.
the
Yeah.
fun thing about the documentary is that we did this one scene, and I told my editor that I was working, my partner producer, that we wanted to use the song Behind Blue Eyes from The Who. And my
Mm.
editor's like, oh, there's no way The Who is going to let you use that song. So we wrote them, and they said, yes, we could use it. Not only could we use it, but we could have lifetime rights to the song for free.
Wow.
So that was amazing. And then I said I had a finished cut, to the degree that it was almost finished, and I wanted to do some more original scoring. And I thought, wow, it would be great to have like the gritty Tom Waits music in there. And so I emailed Tom Waits and I said, hey, can you write maybe 20 minutes of original music for my film. And he said, no, but you can use anything in my library for free. So the film includes 5 Tom Waits songs that he donated. And Maya Sharp also donated a song. She's amazing. And then also I helped John Fishman, the drummer of the band Fish, when his baby was acutely poisoned. He's one of the families I helped. And he is an executive producer of the project as well. So there's lots of fun musical links with the film.
That's awesome. It's great that you have that support, and I know it was probably met with a lot of resistance, as you've kind of mentioned, that you have received resistance from people in the public, as well as industry and things like that. So I'm glad you were able to get it finished and put out there. So yeah.
It's finished in the issue was, as I was finishing the film, I had just done this event with Bernie Sanders in Flint, Michigan. And on stage with Bernie Sanders at my side, I said, we need to hold the lead industry accountable for what's happened in Flint. And then shortly after that, I did an event with Aaron Brockovich. And then somebody called an anonymous complaint alleging financial fraud at the nonprofit that I had founded. And they did a full investigative audit, and that I was illegally arrested for crimes I didn't commit. So it's been like a journey of people really wanting to censor this work and shut things down. And all the charges were dropped, and I ended up suing the state of Oregon Department of Justice in federal court for multiple counts of civil rights violations against me. It's been a very long journey as an activist. And my kids always said, well, Mom, you're really officially an activist now that you were illegally arrested for crimes you didn't commit. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but I could have done without that. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah, and that's unfortunately seems to be the case, is the people doing the best work are penalized for that. So, but it's well worth it. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, it's making an impact. So I think that's important. I think that once you're really deep into this work, you can't go back, because you develop a body of knowledge that you have to share. So because people need to be protected. There's not a lot of other people out there doing this kind of work, and we need to amplify the voices of everyone engaged in this conversation.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So there was a lot of comments in there. I didn't see any question marks or anything, so it's hard to pick out any questions. So if I missed your question earlier on, please put it back in there. Let's see. I do see. Let's see. Laura B said, I had EDTA provocation heavy metal urine collection test, and I was off the charts in lead and cadmium. So not a question, but just comment there.
Yeah, well, so if you're off the charts with a provocation test, so the provocation test is basically pulling the metals out of your tissues. So it's not your immediate recent exposure. It could be your recent exposure plus your historic exposure. But if you're really high in cadmium and you're not working as a welder and you're not in an industrial job, which you may be, but if you're not, then I would definitely look at your chocolate consumption, because that is a primary source of cadmium exposure. And I think that I would stop all chocolate and also stop eating flour products for a month, and then do another provocation test and see if your cadmium levels have gone down. And again, I'm not a doctor, but what I've seen is after a month to 45 days of stopping the potential source of exposure, then doing a follow-up test, if your levels go down, then you can kind of have an indicator that those are the sources of exposure.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see, Extropian Transhuman said, fruits tend to be less toxic than seeds. Nuts and seeds have some of the most concentration from my knowledge. Is that what you found?
What we're finding, and I'm still in the middle of doing this research a little more deeply, but sunflower seeds can be incredibly toxic because they are bioaccumulators. They're actually being used for phytoremediation. So they are shown to effectively absorb lead and other toxicants from the soil. And unfortunately, phytoremediation is not a really useful thing, because people are like, oh, well, plant sunflowers and it'll suck up all the toxicants from the soil and then we can use that land. Well, to phytoremediate with sunflower crops, you'd need hundreds of years
Mm.
of phytoremediation planting, and you'd also need to dispose of those sunflowers as toxic. So we do recommend avoiding sunflower seeds and avoiding other seeds that might be high in calcium, because those are the seeds that are going to bioaccumulate metals. We are working on testing additional seed products, but the only one we've seen so far that's consistently toxic is sunflower seeds, which is really a problem because a lot of families are substituting peanut butter, using sunflower butter instead of peanut butter. And I highly recommend against that if at all possible. I haven't seen science that shows pumpkin seeds are as toxic as sunflower seeds. So we're going to be doing some more testing, but it seems like pumpkin seeds might not be as toxic. And, you know, having a variety of seeds and nuts is always good. Just avoid the sunflowers for the moment. Um, and yeah, that's the best answer I can give right now. I think just be cautious with anything that says it's high in calcium naturally. And then also look to where it's grown. Is it grown? Can you source the product? What we just found out in researching for some of the sunflower seed oil articles we're writing because of the potato chips being contaminated from sunflower seed oil is that sunflower seeds grown for bird seed in the United States is less toxic than the sunflower seeds being grown for human consumption.
Wow.
So, you know, look at other countries to source your nuts and seeds if possible. Grow your own if you can, and make sure the soil's tested first to make sure it's safe. And that's a harder one.
Wow. Okay. So what about tahini then? Since sesame seeds are supposed to be high in calcium, do you know anything about
Ooh,
tahini?
yeah, I don't. I haven't read it. I've done deep dives on most of the foods. I haven't seen anything about sesame seeds being highly toxic. I think that part of the problem is that people rely on serving size information as determined by the industry creating the food product. So when one is eating a sesame seed product, they're assuming you're only going to have a teaspoon or a tablespoon, whereas someone having like tahini butter, you know, on a sandwich, sesame butter on a sandwich might have several tablespoons. So the serving size would be much larger. And that's one of the things we're combating with the food testing is that the industries that make each of these foods says, oh, well, this is safe, or, you know, this is has levels of lead or other metals that are safe, because they're misrepresenting the functional serving size of any of these products. That's a big consideration with chocolate. They're like, well, one chocolate bar is gonna, you know, last you 3 weeks. You're gonna only have, you know, an ounce or a square or two of chocolate every other day. You know, I think the chocolate, the Confectioners Association says you're only gonna have 2 tablespoons of sugar in candy 3 times a week. Who does that? You know,
Yeah.
if you're eating chocolate, you're having a whole chocolate bar almost all the time in one sitting, or maybe across 2 days. So I think the same thing might be true with toxicant concerns with tahini, with sesame seeds, with other seeds, and that the research doesn't show that there's a lot of toxicant concerns, but that's because the serving size is downplayed, especially when you're talking about meeting the caloric needs of a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet. So that
Gotcha.
does needs more inquiry.
Okay. Terrific. Maria says, having sunflower seeds in my salad as you speak.
You know, that's like, so for me, a few sunflower seeds across a salad is not the same concern as eating potato chips fried in sunflower oil or canola oil or eating sunflower butter. And if you're going to have sunflower seeds in your salad, I recommend making sure they're organic and standing by for our food testing. So we're going to be doing some organic sunflower testing and seeing how those turn up. That's another thing. If people want to subscribe to my newsletter, it's free. There's a subscribe button at the top of my website menu, and the people who subscribe to my newsletter usually get the test results for the food testing and other testing we do first. So you'll get that information straight to your inbox, and it won't be censored by social media. So stand by for some sunflower testing.
Yes, definitely everybody should go subscribe to the newsletter and donate if you can to help support these tests, because it is expensive to do these testing. So I know that you always have that option available for people to donate if they want to.
Yeah, it's been great. People, we've had, 30 to 40 people all chipping in $5 or $10 to help do the testing on certain food items and to help nominate the food items they want tested. And that's been a really good way to get a lot of foods tested quickly. People are like, wow, I can't believe how much you're testing. And part of it is that, again, when we write about the testing we're doing, we're being really careful with our language and we're being very science-based. We're researching each of the topics so we can crank out a lot of information quickly, whereas Consumer Reports is like having to vet this stuff by their lawyers, and
Mhm.
we're not doing that because we know what we're writing is science-based and replicable. And if an industry wants to go after us, they can't, because they can't go after the lab test for being wrong, which it's not. And we're also being really careful about all the language we use to describe the concerns for toxicants in certain foods. So we're producing. I'm about to release this month. We're going to release test results for about 65 foods. So
Wow.
it's a lot.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
All right.
today I'm publishing test results for the Unreal coconut bars, the Z bars, and the Good Crisp potato chips.
Mm.
Spoilers, they're all bad.
Yeah, unfortunate. But again, got to go back to the message of whole foods and prepare as much as you can at home. So,
Yep.
um, Maria says, for someone who's just beginning in their journey, what would be the one thing you would recommend?
Food wise, I would recommend avoiding cassava.
Mm,
Um, and rice. That's two things, but I would recommend avoiding cassava and rice. Generally, other than that, I recommend getting tested. Get that heavy metals panel, because if you get the heavy metals panel, you know what metals to look for. Some people, for example, will test high for antimony. And I've worked with a few families where I do home consultations around the country, and where a child has tested positive for high levels of antimony. Well, they've gone to a naturopath where they tested positive for lead or cadmium, and the naturopath recommended that they take daily detox baths for 30 to 45 minutes. But these naturopaths don't understand that your bathtub that's modern and lead free is coated with an antimony enamel. And so these kiddos are being poisoned by their detox baths because
wow.
they're absorbing antimony, because they're sitting in a hot bath with the abrasive Epsom salts and other things they might be putting in the bath, which opens their pores and increases the potential absorption from antimony leaching from the bathtub. So you have no idea what your toxicant profile is unless you get tested. There's a hair test available on Amazon for like $100 through doctor's data. It's not as good as I think as the urine test or a blood test, but it might be a little more accessible if you don't have a doctor or don't have insurance. But most insurance will cover a heavy metals panel as long as it's ordered by your doctor.
Okay. On your website, do you have like a article or anything that show like that you recommend which tests people can use or?
So there's on every page of the website, at the top, there is a what they call a little hamburger menu,
Mm-hmm.
a little menu. And at the first thing on the hamburger menu, it says website menu. If you click on that website menu, there are hundreds of buttons in there. And if you scroll down, it's hard because people are like, oh, your website's confusing. There's so much information. But when you have 4,000 articles,
Yeah.
you can't just put everything at the top because there's too much, right?
Yeah.
So if you scroll down on the website menu, there's a table of contents, and the second item is lead testing. So that if you go down to section 2, the lead testing section, there's an article about testing urine, an article about testing blood, about the half-life of blood, about testing the water, about testing food. So there's all these different articles about different types of testing. And that's a really good place to start.
Okay.
And actually then also in section 1, which is the fundamentals, there's a button that says start here. Almost nobody sees that for some reason. I gotta like use a different font. It's the first button on the menu. It says start here. And that's a good place to start.
Perfect. Okay, great. Again, that's linked in the description box, and you can go check that out. Okay, so a couple more. I don't want to take up. I know it's already 1:07 here in Minnesota, so I know I want to be respectful of your time. We started a little late, so last couple questions. We got um, what is the best nut or seed with the least contamination?
Oh, that's a hard one. Again, I don't think I don't think there is one. I think the answer is variety.
Hmm.
I think with everything in diet, especially plant-based diet, is variety. So if you can um, eat organic whenever possible, organic tends to have lower levels. Don't eat processed and get as much of a variety as you can. Don't rely on one seed or nuts because the potential for contamination varies batch to batch with production, even on the same farm, even with the same supplier. So, you know, we eat a little bit of everything. We have almonds. They have some problems. We have cashews. We have walnuts, Brazil nuts. We try pumpkin seeds. Again, we limit sunflower seeds, but we try and have a little bit of everything. That way, if there is contamination, you're also limiting the source of contamination by having a range of products.
Yeah, makes sense to me. All right. What about wild rice? Have you ever tested anything on that or seen anything about wild rice?
I haven't seen anything about wild rice specifically, and that's a really good suggestion for testing. However, I haven't seen any testing of any rice that was non-detect for arsenic. So
Hmm.
if I were to make an educated guess, I would guess that wild rice probably also has some arsenic, but given how different it is from regular rice, I think there's a chance that it has lower levels, especially given the color variation in wild rice. I think that's an indicator of a plant that might not have the level of arsenic that white or brown rice has. So I'll definitely look into testing that. I think that's a great suggestion.
All right. Terrific. Thank you. And let's see. Judith also asks, what is the best body soap, shampoo, or conditioner?
Oy. Um, so Whew. So what I use is a friend of mine makes homemade soap.
Oh, wow.
I use her soap because I know which those ingredients. I recommend using something with as few ingredients as possible. It's kind of the opposite of the nut conversation. Uh, look for something with fewer ingredients. I think that, we have a big issue with packaged, processed beauty supplies in plastic and the pollution of our planet with the plastics from beauty supplies. So that's a concern for me. So I like the idea of using a bar shampoo or, and a bar soap where there's less plastic. Because I think, when we're looking at these things, we're not just looking at our body, but we're looking at the planet and the earth and being stewards of the earth and what can we do to have a lesser impact on the planet. So look things in a bar format without plastics and with fewer ingredients. I'm sorry, I don't have a better suggestion for that. I really haven't found a brand that I would be confident recommending. I mean, Dr. Bronner's is pretty great. But they also package in plastic. And then they
Mhm.
started selling like these carton refill things, but they also have plastic on them. So, everybody has a flaw.
Yeah. Yeah. We use Bronner's, so, but yeah, I mean, agreed. I mean, your situation sounds ideal. If you can make it your own or yourself, or somebody that does that, I think that's a great way to go. Okay. Well, that is it for the questions. I'm just going to do a quick scroll through. Now, I just kind of let my mouse choose at random who's going to win the barley grass juice powder um, and an ebook of mine. So let's make sure it lands on one of the questions. Let's see here. Oh, it's not a question. See? Uh, uh, Maria. Maria, did you? I think you might have just won recently, but there you go again. Maria, you just won. So you can give me an email at matt@myrawintuition.com and I will get you hooked up with those gifts. And again, guys, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for asking your questions, and a special thanks to Tamara for being here to share this incredible information from Hawaii early in the day. I know we asked her to get up pretty early, but I'm so thankful that she did. And so, yeah, is there any last words or anything that you want to share before we sign off here, Tamara?
I will reemphasize, watch the film. The film is a crash course in the issue. It gives you a good sense about the politics and the history, and I think it helps to inspire people to, giving them the reason to make these changes, and understanding that it's not your fault that this contamination is in the world, and that we all need to do something to make a difference, and having the knowledge of why the problem exists is a really good place to start.
All right. I love it. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, everybody else. I saw Valley commented. She said, excellent interview. A lot of eye opening information here. Thank you both so much for this great interview. You are very welcome, Valley. And yeah, we will see you guys next week. Same time, same place. Hopefully on time. I won't have the technical issues. We'll get that sorted out. But yeah, we'll have another interview next week. And again, everybody remember, go out, go to leadsafemama.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Donate if you can to help her continue to do this work and get these tests out for people. Do you take recommendations for products? Is that right? If people want.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they want to email me at testing@leadsafemama.com and then put food product nomination in the subject line, and they can nominate a food for testing. And then if I get enough requests for that same food, then we will test it.
Okay. Terrific. Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks.
again, everybody. And we will see you next week. Have a great week.
Okay.